So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. For those who aren't familiar with myself, my name's Alex Stevenson, Training Quality Assurance Specialist at Network Rail, and I'm joined today by a number of representatives from NSAR who have helped co-produce and publish the RTAS Rules version 2.0. The reason why the presentation is titled A Collaborative Approach by Network Rail, NSAR and the rail industry is because the majority of changes that have been made to the RTAS Rules version 2.0 are based on feedback that you've kindly provided over the last few years. And just so we can manage everyone's expectations today, the presentation itself will roughly be 45 minutes, followed by a Q&A session. Thank you. So to avoid any background noise, your mic shall remain muted until the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Thank you for those who've submitted your questions prior to the webinar. They will take priority initially. However, if you do have any questions, please submit those questions in the chat function and we'll answer those questions at the end of the presentation. Before I go on to the next bit, if we're unable to answer all of the questions today, the TQAS Network Rail team will answer any questions for you separately at the end of this presentation, as well as providing you the slides, etc. So first of all, I'd just like to say a big thank you to you all, not just for attending today, but ensuring that Network Rail's mantra and safety mission is met, and that is ensuring that everybody goes home safely every day. So a huge thank you for everyone on this call for ensuring that happens. The objectives of today's webinar are as follows. So we're going to go through the publication and compliance requirements. We're going to go through what's new, what has changed, the benefit of those changes, and as I said, we're going to go through a Q&A session at the end to answer any questions. So the actual publication and compliance requirements. So the first point around addressing improvements and feedback, which you kindly provided, as I said, and this sort of feedback, as I said, has been gathered over a number of years, but we would really encourage you to please continue to submit any more improvements that you see to or require to the TQAS mailbox, which I will put into the chat function at the end of today's call, because we will be reviewing and enhancing the rules on a more regular basis to ensure that they remain compliant and current. So that kind of goes on to our second point, really, about saying that a small proportion of version 1's requirements were slightly outdated. So we've tried to make sure that the new rules are current, reflect the current assurance process, but also address some of the future requirements that we anticipate will be of utmost importance in the future. One of those areas is English language, which we'll go into a bit more detail throughout the presentation. Some of the lessons learned from reoccurring breaches of the RTAS rules. So this has mainly come from a formal review panel context. As an assurance team at Network Rail and at NSAR as well, we've discussed some of the latest trends and how to address them. And point 4, increasing intelligence of bad practice within version 1. So this has been mainly picked up from a data and intelligence gathering that NSAR have done throughout their assurance visits. And we'll start to share those practices and actual trends that we find with you on a more kind of periodic basis, so you're aware of what those latest trends are, so that you can address them collectively. So going on to the actual publication itself, as everyone was aware, the RTAS rules were published on the 24th of August. This was on NSAR's website. There was communications that went out via Skills Backbone, and a few days later by Sentinel Communications as well. There's 2 documents that are available. One of the documents on NSAR's website is the full version of the rules. No kind of highlights or anything like that. It's a plain version for everyone to see. The additional document is actually a change document. This change document focuses on the differences between RTAS Rules version 1.0 and RTAS Rules version 2.0. And if you look at the actual highlighted changes, you will see that the blue clauses are completely new clauses. The yellow are altered clauses from version 1.0. And the green clauses are any clauses that have moved section. We would advise and recommend that you all familiarize yourself with the entire document, because there has been quite a few movers and changes between version 1 and version 2. I've highlighted if there's been a drastic change from version 1 to version 2. Say, for example, the assurance requirements when you were looking to join the RTAS scheme in version 1 were right at the document, bottom of the document. Now in version 2, they're section 3 of the document. So that's some of the drastic changes I've identified. But there's been some more subtle changes, like say, for example, a clause might have changed from 1.23 to 1.27, say, for example. So please familiarize yourself with the entire document. And it's also really important because a number of you on this call will be the catalysts and the experts of the RTAS rules, so to speak. So you need to cascade all of those requirements to your fellow peers. So you need to ensure that you're all on the same level with one another. So there is a 3-month compliance period because we recognize there was a number of changes that you required to make as an assured provider. Although this should give you plenty of time to make those necessary changes to your policies, your procedures, and your QIP. As highlighted, there will be no grace period granted, so it will be that 3-month compliance period. Angie, do you mind giving everyone on this call a little bit of what your expectations will be prior to the compliance date, please?
No problem. It is really, as Alex has said, that we have chosen an extended compliance period for the RTAS Rules V2. So we're looking for providers to already have familiarised themselves and be working towards those new sets of rules or those enhanced requirements really quite quickly, so that the period of the 24th of November almost comes and goes as just another day does, rather than there being a we're working as we are now, and then 24th of November, we've all changed and geared up to the new sets of requirements. So we're looking for people to enhance them and put them into their policies and procedures as soon as possible, and be able to discuss those during assurance visits between now and the 24th of November.
Superb, thank you, Angie. So as we go on to the next slide, this focuses on the general changes that have been made. So as you can see by the first bullet point, we try to reformat the fact that the rules are a network rail document. There's quite a lot of confusion within the industry actually that these are network rails rules, and NSAR are the appointed assurance organisation. But what's really important to remember is we do work very closely and collaboratively with one another to ensure that compliance is met. Point 2, regrouping of the requirements that alter RTAS version 1 clauses in most places. So as I said, there's been a number of movers and changes compared to version 1, and that's highlighted in green. So please familiarise yourself with that. There has been a full legal review of the requirements to ensure that they remain consistent and compliant, but at the same time, we've tried to remove some of the legal jargon to ensure that the rules are easy to understand and implement by all. But it's really important also to remember that there has been some legal purposes and some terminology kept in to ensure that we remain compliant. Apologies, has everyone got their mic muted, please? Because a little bit of background noise. If everyone just could ensure that just for everybody else. Thank you very much. And then point 4, in terms of the increased detail to clauses, it's really important to make sure that it was easier to understand. We added some clarity to some of the particular clauses, so they were very specific in terms of what the requirements were. There's no, and that actually goes on to my next point, there's no hidden kind of requirements. It's transparent. Everything that Network Rail and NSAR require you to do are compliant and are available within the rules. But at the same time, also what Network Rail need to do as the organisation, and also NSAR as the appointed assurance organisation. Everything there is in black and white, requirements and roles and responsibilities of each party. There's been greater alignment to the terminology used in the Sentinel scheme rules, because both documents, obviously one works from a sponsorship perspective and the other one from a training perspective. There's very much a focus on trying to make sure both documents can be used at the same time. And then also there's references to the current online platform, Skills Backbone, to make sure that it's up to date and compliant, really. So going on to some of the new clauses, which I said are highlighted in blue in the actual highlighted document. So we've actually taken an approach to ensure that everyone is familiar with, if there is any improvements, future publications, dispensations, etc., they will go through a key select cohort of stakeholders. As I said, that actually this document, we really want to ensure it's a document made by the industry for the industry. So we've really tried to bring together some key stakeholders to make sure that they discuss any future improvements or enhancements that are made. We've strengthened the requirements in section 1 about sponsoring for the purposes of training only. This is clause 1.3, because it continues to be a very serious issue that individuals are purely sponsored for the purposes of training only and not actually being put to work on the infrastructure. So everybody is aware, if there is evidence to support that this is the case, it could go to formal review panel to investigate. And a really good inclusion, I feel, to the rules is actually being around taking the two CTM 202 requirements from issue 3 and put them into the RTAS Rules version 2.0. There was a little bit of confusion around some of the terminology used in that particular standard. So what we decided to do is, if any training or assessment that is delivered which falls under the RTAS scope has now all the requirements for CTM 202 have now been put into the RTAS Rules version 2.0, which really is a good enhancement because it's all in one document, so you don't have to cross-refer from one document to another. I now hand you over to Angie to go through section 3 with you all.
Thank you. So we've added new restrictions into section 3, which are new restrictions on parties that are suspended or proven to be involved in breaches of the RTAS rules. So within RTAS V2, individuals who fall into that category will not be able to hold future positions of influence or any involvement in planning, facilitation and the delivery of training and assessment by an assured provider without explicit approval from Network Rail. So we've increased the controls around that to make sure that future or that migration of people as they move through the industry, if they have been involved in breaches, then there may be possible consequences as they move through the rest of the industry. We've formalised requirements of audits of the assurance organisation, so effectively that's NSAR. And in the rules, we now say that NSAR is audited on an annual basis by Network Rail. We've improved the wording of existing requirements with the inclusion of new dispensation requirements. So we've strengthened the wording around training and assessment only being delivered by assured positions. that the use of and delivery to toolkit materials specific requirements is very clear within the rules. We've prohibited the exceeding of delegate numbers under any circumstances, and we've allowed a dispensation of where training packages as such need to be delivered that may reduce an overall duration of modules when they're combined together, that we have opened the opportunity for such proposals to go to Network Rail for consideration, and NSAR will facilitate those discussions with you. An example of that is the likes of on-track plans, where you may have several modules that cover the same requirements because they're designed to be delivered individually. When you put them together, you wouldn't deliver the same part of the course over and over again. So we've enabled that any such packages can be sent to NSAR for discussion with Network Rail, and there would be a formal dispensation given by Network Rail. Where that's the case, the dispensation needs to be kept within the course packs where those packages have been delivered. Then when you have your assurance visit by NSAR, there's no question within the pack as to whether there has been an unauthorised reduction in the training durations. In section 4, we've added new requirements for trainers and assessors returning to delivery after absence. It's to be notified to NSAR, and mentoring requirements need to be introduced. That needs to happen in a combination of circumstances. It's where a trainer or assessor has been absent over a period of time exceeding 6 months and/or has significantly reduced their delivery of a particular course or competence over a period of time exceeding 6 months, and where the changes to training and assessment materials or standards have taken place. It's important to note, though, that these are minimum requirements. Best practice providers would be driving this when somebody has been absent for a period of 6 months, or they have a period of significantly reduced delivery over a period of time of 6 months, and even when the training and assessment materials or the standards have not taken place. So as before, the RTAS rules are the minimum requirements, and we're always going to push and drive providers to exceed those and do the best that they can do within the backdrop of the frameworks that they work in. We formalised the dispensation facilities where demand for workplace assessments makes the compliance for the 6 assessments per 12-month periods not possible. So what that means is where an assessor is working in an area of delivery, it's usually around about distribution as an example, where there is not the opportunity to deliver 6-month workplace assessments within a 12-month period, we have formalised the ability to request a dispensation so that the total number can be looked at and considered in a realistic context. In section 5, we've improved the detail of the premises requirements for delivery of training. So as we know, you need NSAR approval for OLEC track induction and on-track plant facilities. However, we haven't specified specifically practical site requirements, and it doesn't need the NSAR approval visits to practical sites to deliver, such as PTSD, CCR, AOD, electrification, etc. But we have strengthened the rules so that those facilities need to be fit for purpose for the learner experience and health and safety. They need to meet the mandated lesson plan specifications, and the owner of the particular site being used still holds their assurance, i.e. they're not suspended. Section 5, we've increased the upskilling requirements. The timescales remain unchanged from RTAS V1, so your 3 months of 2 observations. But we have done first-time trainer observations and mandated those within the rules. Whilst the first-time assessor observation isn't mandated in the RTAS rules, as you're aware, NSAR does currently operate this for first-time assessors, where the individual is not already a trainer, and that will continue. The mentor must be physically present during the mentored events. That is now written into the rules. And we've also specified the suitability of a mentor. So we're looking for the mentor to have held the capability for a minimum of 12 months, delivered the competence themselves in a minimum of 4 times over the previous 12 months, and within that period not having been involved in any incident, accident, close call, formal review or investigation involving the competence being mentored within that same period. This is, we hope, to be able to improve the standard of mentoring and the quality of the mentorship that your novice trainers and assessors will be receiving. We've improved training and assessment record retention changes. So we had a lot of feedback from companies that are also the employees of delegates. And it was a realistic change to make, that where an individual is an employee of the provider and is attending their competence and training department, who is also an assured provider, that such things as booking forms are not required, joining instructions, copy of ID, and permission to copy the ID. We realised that these documents are not required. The booking and the joining instructions of training or assessment that would be attended is generally dealt with by rostering arrangements and internal emails, and departments by arranging that attendance. So we've made it in this situation that those documents would not be required, providing the copy of ID and the permission to keep that ID is held by another function, which is usually the Human Resources Department. It's key to note, though, where the organisation is a sub-sponsor of the individual, the permission to attend the training and assessment from the primary is still required. Following on with the theme of formalising practical areas training requirements, we've also mandated that practical site safety briefing records for those sites also needs to be retained. And those are the same examples as I have mentioned already, such as DCCR, AOD, electrification, etc.
Thank you, Angie. So the section 5, there's been some enhancements around, well, data correction requirement, and some of the enhancements are based on 2 main reasons. One of those reasons is around the amount and volume of requests from individual providers for data corrections. And the second kind of reason for this amendment is the amount of time we've seen the data correction being, that's from initial delivery through to the data request. We've seen some requests over 2,000 days old, and that's not just 1 or 2 requests, that is a number of requests. So very...
Alex? Apologies, we do have some technical gremlins in the system. Alex has been temporarily disconnected at the moment. He hasn't gone on mute, he has been disconnected. He will pop back in as soon as his technology allows him to. However, what Alex was advising or going through was in terms of data corrections that Network Rail have been receiving. They have been contacting NSAR to talk about such examples of hundreds of days old at the time that they're put into Network Rail, and there is a drive for that to be able to reduce. So the requirements of Sentinel notifications within RTAS V2 has been strengthened, and instances of repeat data corrections being put into the Sentinel help desk that are more than 21 days old. Network Rail will be looking at examples of those, all examples actually that exceed 21 days. They'll be reviewed by Network Rail, and of course, if there is anything to be concerned of in Network Rail's opinion, then that will be referred to formal review, and it could result in sanctions being applied. So it's really important that you look at your notification procedures and make sure that those are happening within the 21 days. New to the RTAS rules is the formal review procedure. So all of the requirements that are currently in RTAS V1 that look at how formal reviews are conducted, they've all been put into their own appendix so that they don't get mixed up with the other requirements. What that does is it details what RTAS does at the moment, but in a lot more detail. So the reporting of alleged or suspected breaches is clearly documented. How the formal reviews themselves are conducted between relevant parties. So what role does the assured provider play? What role does NSAR play and Network Rail? All of that is now documented in a great amount of detail for complete transparency on how the formal review process is conducted. The next item is very important for you to remember or to highlight as a major change within the RTAS rules. So currently in RTAS V1, we do have a clause that says that if an individual is suspended more than twice in a 3-year period, then that could potentially lead to a permanent withdrawal of assurance. That timescale of 3 years has been removed in RTAS 2.0. So basically, anybody who is suspended more than twice over an undetermined period could potentially be recommended for a permanent ban. That is obviously on a case-by-case basis, but the reason that that was brought in is because we could have had people who were undertaking serious breaches of the RTAS rules and received quite lengthy suspensions. But if that suspension was more than 3 years in duration and they came back to RTAS and say on the second day of delivery they breached again, particularly if it was in the same area, if that particular breach was also deemed serious enough to warrant another suspension, then the first suspension has been wiped from the records because it was a 3-year timescale that applies. So it's very important to know that it is now over an indefinite period of time. And the document also covers in great detail the conduct of formal review appeals and hearings, the parties involved, and the addresses and who does what is all the way through that document. The assured...
Can you hear me now?
Alex, yes, I can. You're back.
Thank you. Apologies, everyone. My internet connection went in and out there. But Angie, thank you very much for covering those points for me. So going on to Appendix 2, so Angie can have a little bit of a break there. This focuses on the requirements when an assured provider decides to leave the RTAS assurance scheme. This very much focuses on what those specific requirements are. It's detailed within the Appendix 2, so it clearly defines who is responsible for each stage of that process. I will not go into too much detail there, but if there is a case where you do decide that you'd no longer like to deliver RTAS assured training, then please review and consider what the requirements are specifically within Appendix 2. That's a completely new section. There's been 4 new RTAS rule breaches added into the RTAS version 2.0, which you can clearly see on your screen. These are new breaches to reflect the current circumstances. These could always change and be updated because the environment always changes, and it's really important that we keep up to speed with some of the trends, as I said kind of earlier in the presentation. But it also continues to add the emphasis that all the other breaches within the RTAS rules are
Apologies,
equally
Alex.
as important.
Alex, are you still there? Yeah, I'm sorry, Alex. Your internet connection has...
Please familiarise yourself.
Alex?
Again.
Alex, could you do that slide again, please? We did lose you.
Can you hear me again now?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm so sorry of my internet connection. I've not actually ever had this issue before. I'll go through that whole section again, just in case anyone missed anything. So there are 4 new breaches added to the RTAS Rules version 2.0 that reflect the current circumstances that we've noticed from the trends and previous kind of breaches, and added in new areas of focus. These changes and rules breaches added into RTAS Rules version 2.0 will always be reviewed, enhanced and updated to reflect the current environment. And it's really important that you familiarize yourself not with just these new inclusions here, but also all the other breaches within the version 2.0 are equally as important, but they'll always be updated. As I said, the rules are constantly reviewed and considered, and the stakeholder group will review these to see if they're up to date to reflect the current environment. So these are some of the changes to version 2.0, and I will hand over to Angie to go through those first few slides for you.
Okay, so now we've been over the main things of what is new. We're looking in the more finer detail as to what may have changed within current requirements or added to current requirements. So leading on from what Alex said about sponsoring for the purposes of training, we have made it clear within RTAS V2 what Sentinel's sponsorship of a trainer and assessor must be, because there was some confusion that was generated around RTAS V1. So to be very clear, RTAS now does state that the trainer and assessor must be sponsored by the provider they're delivering for, and that all trainers and assessors' primary sponsor must be an assured provider. We've increased the clarity on assurance visit action plans and timescales. So RTAS clause 3.5 goes into a lot more detail than previously about what the timescales are for submission of action plans from provider to NSAR, what the provider's actions mean and the timescales that relate to those, what target dates are covered, and the submission and review of action plan evidence. That's all documented clearly for you now as increased support within RTAS V2. We've increased guidance on deviation from durations. Both of these are to be documented and retained. But there is a move within training materials to add instructions into training toolkits materials, guidance as to where durations can be reduced or where they can be flexed to try and provide you a more realistic structure for delivering that training course. Where it's not possible, it's not possible, but where it is possible, there is a move to actually document that within the training materials. However, because we're so early in the duration of that happening, the RTAS rules are covering both bases, that where those instructions aren't contained within the materials, the current RTAS V1 risk assessment processes remain unchanged. We've just made sure that they're both covered within the document. We've increased guidance on trainer and assessor observations in the same way as for mentors, to be explicit that observers need to be directly observing, so the observer needs to be present with the trainer or assessor. We have new requirements on trainer and assessor observations. So again, it reiterates that formal observations are direct observations. And we've added in a new requirement to the trainer and assessor observations section of the RTAS rules that shows that when you sub-sponsor an assured trainer or assessor, observations are now required of the sub-sponsor. The frequency or the number of those is on a percentage-based sample. So effectively, if they deliver a lot for you as a sub-sponsor, then you're looking at an appropriate level of observation of the training that they're delivering for you. If it's not frequent and it's very rare, the RTAS rules version 2 now mandate that you must have at least one observation per discipline. The other frequencies and volumes on trainer observations, the 3 for a trainer and assessor in a 12-month period, or 4 for a trainer and assessor, those remain unchanged. We've improved detail regarding the de-sponsoring of assured trainers and assessors, so it's now clear that no action can be taken until NSAR has communicated whether there's any reason that the individual cannot be de-sponsored by the provider. We've increased wording of existing requirements covering online exams. We've taken that as one of the biggest steps within RTAS 2 to provide you more guidance, as online exams is one of the areas that we've identified over the last 3 years was the most misunderstood. So non-operational trainers, they do online exams only every 12 months. Operational trainers have to do their interim assessments between 9 and 12 months, and it's got to be done before the online exam can be taken. If you don't do your interim assessment as an operational trainer, then the online exam results are likely to be rejected. Online exams can be taken when temporarily suspended pending conclusion of a formal review. So those systems are still available to any trainer that is in that position. But if that suspension is the result of an RTAS outcome, online exam facilities are removed from that trainer because the assurance has been removed as the outcome of a formal review, and online exams can't be taken when that's the case.
So the command of the English language clause 511.2 and footnote 19 has been enhanced, as it now includes candidates as well. Previously it was just delegates only, and most importantly, the command of the English language should be considered for all training courses and not just PTS. Now, ultimately, the responsibility shall sit with the sponsors, but you as the assured providers are the gatekeepers. It shouldn't necessarily just be considered on whether the individual can do an emergency call. There should be other examples as well, say, for example, when they do the introduction, etc. But what's also really important to remember is, as we focus more on the English language aspect, Network Rail you will have your full backing from Network Rail of any claims around discrimination raised by the individual or sponsor. And Network Rail are also looking at some enhancements and improvements to support this new clause. So watch this space effectively, but it's something just to kind of emphasize, so to speak. There's been an update to the Safe Work Pack retention requirements. So for PTS and track induction training, a full Safe Work Pack is required to be retained, and extracts are available when it's not PTS and track induction. All the requirements are available there, just for you all to kind of see what is required from an extract perspective. All of the flowcharts from 7.1 through to 7.6 have been updated to reflect the current requirements. This is also detailed within the main body as well. So please familiarize yourself with all of those requirements so you are familiar, if you are ever in the position, formal review, etc., you are fully aware of how that procedure and who is responsible for what particular area. So there's been quite a lot of update as well to the RTAS formal review outcome guidelines. So there has been an addition in terms of if you are, so previously within version 1, you either had 5 years or permanent ban. So now there's been an addition where it's between, greater than 5 years, say for example, could be a suspension that is applied as a result of a formal review. No longer will it just consider 5 years to a permanent ban. So those sanctions that fall in between are not quite as serious as a permanent ban consideration, could be greater than 5 years. With regards to the permanent ban aspect, previously you would have just seen it as sabotage or malicious intent, but now it considers other areas as well, such as deliberate or reckless contravention or contravention for personal benefit. And this is just in terms of some of the changes that we've seen. Before I go on to the negligence section, one of the reasons why this is so important is actually the first permanent ban to an assured provider is actually being passed, and you will receive further communications very shortly explaining the permanent ban. So that has now been put into place, where previously it was never enforced, but now it has come into play. There's also been an update to the negligence section as well. Previously, it just had could lead to potential injury or loss, but now it is, previously it said you had to, but now it is potential to lead to. So that's really important to remember, that it's not just has, but could potentially lead to negligence, and focusing around that particular aspect. Some of the benefits to yourselves as those who are part of the RTAS assurance scheme. So as I said at the beginning, there has been a complete review of the actual rules themselves, and focused around that plain English aspect. It's been rewritten to make sure it's easier to read and has greater meaning to you, to remove some of that that legal jargon there. The rules have been written by the industry for the industry. Please continue to submit your improvements to the scheme. As I said, I'll put the TQAS mailbox in the chat function shortly. There's been, as we continue to improve the scheme, there's been now a level of benchmark that you need to adhere to ensure that everybody goes home safely every day. There's also the benefit of holding those who are accountable to account. One point that I wasn't quite sure if it was covered while I was out of the webinar is that it's now applicable to guiding minds and those who have a direct input within the RTAS assurance scheme. It is not just applicable to trainers and assessors and assured providers. That also means suspensions from now on can also be applied to guiding minds, to planners, to whoever, central coordinators, whoever is involved or seen as contributing to the actual breach itself, is applicable to an RTAS suspension. Thank you for Tracy for putting that. That's the TQAS mailbox in there, which Tracy has kindly provided, so thank you very much. Also, with regards to point 4, it also tells you what is applicable to Network Rail and NSAR as well. So NSAR will be held to account as the assurance organisation. Network Rail will also have our roles and responsibilities to ensure that we adhere to the timescales, etc. So all the roles and responsibilities are clearly defined within the RTAS rules. There has also, as I said, been drastic improvements made to the flowcharts to reflect the current process, timescales, requirements. So it's easy to understand who is applicable to what, as I said, the roles and responsibilities. And any future changes will be made swiftly because of the key cohort of stakeholders that we now have that will review and approve any changes, dispensations, etc. that go through. So it will be more swiftly considered by the industry and enhancements and improvements made by the industry. So thank you very much for listening. We've gone through that in 44 minutes, so which is really good. We'll now go on to the Q&A session. So please submit your questions now if you have any questions in the chat function. I can see there's been a couple there, but I'll go through some of the questions that we've actually had submitted before the actual webinar itself. So we had a question on clause 2.1.1.1, and this focused on some of the trainers and their qualifications as a mentor kind of didn't support the use of apprenticeships level 3 and level 4. And it was just focusing on, can trainee trainers working towards qualifying to deliver training under mentorship as part of their development in level 3 and level 4 qualifications, this can be completed on other Sentinel courses, but this cannot be applicable to any within the RTAS assurance space. We've also had a question around on clause 2.3.2. How does a non-operational trainer gain new competencies when they are non-operational to gain any additional capabilities?
Sorry, we are still experiencing technical issues. We shall see if Alex manages to get us back online. Is there any questions that anybody would like to have addressed whilst we are waiting for Alex to come back to us? So is there a reason that someone has to be physically present for formal observations given current circumstances and minimizing? Yes, yeah. I understand the current climate, of course, and that 2 metre distance can be adhered to during the formal observation. Effectively, it's items of bad practice that we've identified in the past. That we were having observations, put over to us during assurance visits, etc. And when our delivery managers were then having chats with the training manager whilst they were on site doing their assurance visit and, talking about the content of those observations, there effectively was a response of, oh, well, I wasn't there and somebody else did it for me. And I'm quite happy to accept what their word is, and they put their name to it, etc. So there's an element of bad practice that we've been trying to move away from. Effectively, I would be saying if it's not possible at all to do those observations at a safe distance, then you should be contacting NSAR for some guidance and some support and to try and work the issue through. So this current climate is something that will change over a period of time, although not right now, I realise that. But we do still understand or expect that a safe distance can be created whilst you are doing that observation.
I guess, Angie, from one area is if the trainer or assessor were that the trainer had to keep stepping in. If you're doing it remotely, then how would that happen? So you have to think of all aspects of how the support will happen.
Yep, for the upskilling side of it,
Yes.
definitely. Mm-hmm. Yep. Alex, have you been able to rejoin us at all?
I have. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Where did we get up to? Sorry,
it's just your second question.
My second question. Perfect. Thank you very much. So we've gone on to another question that focused around clause 2.3.1. What would be deemed as a similar event? For example, does this mean a COS assessor could apply for a PC assessor competence without the need for upskilling with a mentor? So this specific example would not be prohibited because the activity is specifically different in terms of risk, history, incidents, and so on. A list could not be produced, but will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. If someone feels that a course is similar, there'll need to be specific approval by the CDG in order to consider that. There has been a question around 4.2.12. If a course is catering, only catering for delegates employed by the organisation undertaking the training, can it not be allowed to reduce the course duration in advance? So can that be done if it's delivered to someone within your business? The materials and lesson plans stipulate what it has to be in terms of the delivery. There is no deviation.
I do apologise, everybody. There's a great technical issue.
Away from those materials, so that you do keep up with the mandated. There's been.
Sorry, Alex, carry on. You were having more technical issues. So effectively, the lesson plans are mandated for everybody, regardless of what contractual arrangements you have in place or where that delegate comes from. The lesson plan guidance is created from the learner's requirements and not anything that sits around that.
I'm back. Can you hear me now?
Yes, please.
Right, I'm gonna have a word with Virgin Media. Apologies, everyone. This hasn't happened before. Also, it's a new laptop, so I will make sure that this is sorted. So apologies. 4.2.15, planning for assessments is difficult with candidates working nights, weekends, etc. Is it possible to try and assign another assessor to conduct an observation? Considering the assessment is mostly observing a candidate and taking their duties and asking questions, would mentoring of quality of the assessments not be achievable by desktop review, documentation, gathering feedback from the candidates, and could use technology to record the assessment and review afterwards? So it was advised on the last webinar that you need to make sure that you kind of focus on observations being physically present and within the observation itself, to ensure that the requirements are met. So it's imperative that they remain present, and that is one of the reasons why it was added into the actual rules this time round, to ensure that happens, to make sure that the compliance is met. There has also been a question regarding if there is a course. It's around 5.6.7 part 2. There's been a question around how will work for low demand courses. There might be such courses as PC, PyCop, etc. If there is low demand and rarely delivered courses, trainers, qualifications for being mentors, etc. This was discussed in the last webinar, but will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. So if this is an issue in terms of mentorship requirements, please submit that question and it will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis to ensure that there isn't any, the rules aren't unfair to meet those specific requirements, because we do recognise at the same time there are some difficulties in meeting that particular clause itself. There's been another question on 5.6.3. Could there be timescales listed around the first? Sorry, when it was focusing actually around first-time trainer capability observations, around availability for NSAR to actually come and do that particular first-time trainer observations. NSAR will do, previously have done absolutely everything to try and grant that particular request for you. There has been a few incidents where it hasn't been possible. So moving forward, could you please provide 3 dates over a 4-week period, and NSAR will do their utmost to accommodate that for you, especially with the current circumstances that we face at the moment. We would really gratefully, or NSAR would also gratefully ask if you could please submit those 3 dates within that kind of 4-week period, so they're able to kind of do that first time observation for you. There was a question on 5.12.1. Is there allowance for no booking forms required when there is contract between the training organisation and the external organisation? There isn't going to be any leeway around that. The particular requirements around booking forms are within the rules. There's going to be no chance to vary or deviate from that particular clause. So the specific requirements within that are going to remain in place, regardless of the contractual and relationships that are held between yourselves and a party itself. Around an additional question on 5.12.7, we're printing out notification for, so we are having to print out notification from Sentinel, include this in the documentation. As well as this not being environmentally friendly, there's obviously a database that could do this. And Network Rail around Oracle, there's basically Network Rail, we cannot provide this because notifications are made via Oracle. So NSAR are aware of those requirements around Oracle notifications, and around printing, it could be done in terms of PDF and electronically held. So please have that one in mind. And that kind of goes on to the next question as well, around, again, focusing on swipe in and swipe out. Again, it can be PDF and held electronically to assure that there isn't any necessary around paper wastage, because we all are really important around the environment. So there's some of the questions that have already been submitted. There has been some other questions and which were answered previously in the other webinar. And as I said, if there is, we've got some questions here, but if I have missed any questions from the ones that have already been sent, please bear in mind we will answer all of those individually by the TQAS mailbox, which Tracy kindly provided in the webinar call for you. So we have some additional questions as well.
Thank you, Alex. Yes, we do. But just before we go on to that, can I just go back to, in terms of doing swipe in and swipe out, and having to provide things on paper? It's just a very minor point, but effectively, when we say you can do this electronically, we have expected for quite a considerable number of years to see a combination of paper and electronic files. Providing your electronic files are referenced specifically to that training event, of course you can print out your Sentinel notifications, swipe in, swipe out, etc. by printing to PDF and then just retaining it within an electronic training file, which when NSAR come along to do your verification, you're then providing paper records and access to the electronic files so that we can see that the evidence is present. So it's just that one aspect. If you retain everything on the history of your iPhone, for example, on your swipe in, swipe out, then that may well have disappeared by the time you have your assurance visit. So when we say you can maintain it electronically, you can do that by printing to PDF, but just keep it as a referenced electronic file for us to look at when we're doing verification. It was just that minor point on there. Sorry, Alex, didn't mean to.
Thank you. Thank you for
cut you off on that.
No, not at all. Thank you.
I would say the next question that we have is on 1.16, which is hours and fatigue for trainers and assessors but candidates, and some of our candidates are external. Apart from when they're swiped in, do they need to see their fatigue details from their employer prior to training? I've seen providers do this in a number of ways, by either the booking forms or a declaration form that they are within their working hours and they are not double shifting, etc. But you have to also swipe them in, which the app will tell you automatically at the point that you try to swipe them in as to whether they are exceeding their fatigue guidance or not. I know that sometimes in as advised, rare circumstances, maybe somebody's forgotten to swipe in out, etc. In that instance, you have to get a risk assessment done by their line manager. So there is information you can ask for in advance, but really that swipe in, swipe out at the time of training is the real-time data that you want to see on somebody's fatigue when they're looking to come for training for you. Alex, your internet connection seems quite stable at the moment. Sean is asking if you could go through the upskilling of non-operational trainers again, because most of the answers were cut off. So could you just explain that again, please?
Yeah, of course. So there was a question around upskilling in terms of non-operational trainer. So that isn't possible because first you have to hold the actual operational competence itself. So there isn't any way for a non-operational trainer to upskill themselves via that. They have to follow the actual route to competence first in order to then upskill within the actual trainer capability or assessor capability aspect. Is there anything you'd like to add on to that at all, Angie, or?
No, I would say that we have brought it about in terms of bad practice in the past, of there being inadequate level of frontline knowledge in terms of how it's working out there for real on within the worksite environment or out on track, and that's the reason why that was brought in. But if there's any direct details or scenarios that you're specifically thinking, Sean, then contact the Fresh Desk if we have misunderstood what your question is. The next one is from Craig Anderton. So if track induction is undertaken in a controlled environment that doesn't require a safe system of work, how do we manage this and retain it within the course pack? Craig, I think you're going to have to follow that one up in Fresh Desk, or if you want to unmute yourself to clarify what your question is, then that would help us to be able to answer it for you during this webinar.
Yeah, thanks, Angie. Basically, all it is track induction. Most of them are carried out in a controlled environment, stillages, things like that. They don't actually require a full safe system of work pack. RT 9909, yeah, safe work pack verification form, things like that. So how do we actually go about getting these packs? Who are they formed by? Who are they planned by? Things like that to enable us to then retain them.
Right, so I think it is probably a question that we'll have to take. It might be a particular scenario that you find yourselves in terms of how to get a safe works pack for that type of environment. So it's more about actually getting the pack itself. Is that the concern? Or is it just nobody's going to give you one because that environment doesn't mean that you need to have one?
Yeah, the environment doesn't require a safe system of work pack.
Yeah, okay.
Produce our own COS briefings and things like that.
Yeah, we would be looking for, in that situation, we'd be looking for very detailed risk assessments for that type of environment, and to ensure that everybody is briefed properly, and that you can evidence within the pack that the full practical layout risks have been briefed appropriately, even though you don't require a safe works pack. The most important part about that is that that environment has been risk assessed properly for the people that are going to work on it, and that the people that are going to work on it understand fully what those risks are. So I would suggest that's the way that you get around that, and that's obviously a scenario that your quality assurance manager would understand when they're looking at your particular packs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, basically what you're saying is it's a correct task briefings and that, rather than the safe work pack then, isn't it?
Yeah, effectively. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
It may be worth to discuss that with your quality assurance manager in advance, though, just so that you're not asked any questions when they're there in terms of why there isn't one, etc., etc. But your quality assurance manager will be familiar with your management system, so it should be.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Is there any other questions at all?
I don't believe that we have any, and we have gone 4 minutes over time. So if there aren't anybody else who is wanting to ask a particular question, I'll just hold on another few seconds to see if we do have any more that pop up.
But as I said, if there are any other questions, please submit those to the TQAS mailbox. We will address those for you to ensure that we can support you through this compliance period. We're just very grateful for everyone to be on this call today, and together we will ensure that everybody goes home safely every day, which is really important. And just thank you, everyone. Oh,
sorry, Alex, we just
okay.
have one last question.
Yeah, of course.
Bear with me, looking for an example of 6.3. So that's an example of a breach. Is that right? Yes. So an example of competent standards. So that in clear language, I hope. Don't shoot me if it's not. But in clear language, we're looking at if the competent standards that says that you have to do something in a certain way, or you have to meet a number of occasions that you do something. If the competent standard mandates that you have to do something and it's not explicitly mentioned in the training material, i.e. it says this type of prerequisite is as per competent standard and gives you the number, you then refer to the competent standard for that requirement. So both the lesson plan and the competent standard go hand in hand. So that's what that specific area means. Also, breaches of Network Rail specific standards would be in terms of 019, having to adhere to all of Network Rail standards that are associated to that particular lesson plan in that training course. So I think we're pretty much finished. As Alex has said, please use the TQAS mailbox. You've also got Freshdesk to email in should you need anything. We will be issuing copies of the slides after the webinar cycles have finished. Just want to apologise, and Alex, it's not your fault in any way, shape or form, but do realise we've had some technical difficulties during the webinar. To date, we've done our best to keep it stable, and Alex, you've covered and repeated as much as you possibly can. If there is anything that we have missed, please accept our apologies for that, and please do email us so that we can respond to you via that platform.